If you remember my love in your prayers as strongly as I adore you, I shall hardly be forgotten, for I am yours. Henry R. forever.
By daily proof you shall me find, to be to you both loving and kind.
Henry had moved heaven and earth to marry Anne Boleyn. The price for crowning her was the delivery of the much longed for male heir that Henry so desired.
You have chosen me from low estate to be your queen and companion, far beyond my desert or desire.
Henry was furious at Anne for the delivery of a daughter, and indeed that this was the beginning of the end of their relationship.
Neither let that stain, that unworthy stain, of a disloyal heart towards your good grace, ever cast so foul a blot on me, and on the infant princess your daughter.
In the year of our Lord, 1526, I stand as sovereign, anointed by God above all earthly dominions. Yet I find my heart and throne burdened. For my marriage to Queen Catherine hath yielded no heir male to secure England's future. My counsellors murmur, the kingdom stirs in unrest. And I see before me a nation in need of strength, of continuity, a son to uphold our legacy. While our forces test their mettle against the French in this second campaign, I find my heart embattled in another war. A struggle of conscience, duty, and passion. Thus do I seek wisdom from God and His Holiness the Pope, that I might annul the past and fulfill my sacred purpose, to bring forth a line that will defend our England, our faith, and our name long after I am dust.
"7 long years spent in France, and now I do return to England's cold and callous shores. I have learned far more than French dances and courtly games. I have learned the very art of presence, how a woman may command and compel without the utterance of a single word. My sister Mary knoweth what it is to be desired. Yet I do intend to be far more than a fleeting delight."
Anne was born a traditional Catholic in a traditionally Catholic family. But her father was a diplomat abroad, and he was able to secure her coveted positions at 2 European courts. Firstly, at the court of Margaret of Austria, who was famed for educating women, and then also at the court of France, where Anne was exposed again to new ideas and new ways of thinking. This was a vibrant Renaissance court. Anne was exposed to these ideas, which questioned the centrality of the papacy and also which championed the reading of the Bible in the vernacular, in people's own language. This really gave power to people to make their own decisions rather than having religion foisted upon them by a third party. So whilst these ideas may not seem radical to us today, they certainly were at the time when Anne was exposed to them.
"With me, I have brought the French manner in dress, and the sharpness of wit, to the wide eyes and soft whispers of the English court. My gowns, my laughter, my ready tongue, all do leave them bewildered, yet I see how their eyes linger. Soon they shall envy what they now mock.
Henry VIII was actually quite slow in his advances towards Anne Boleyn, who joined his court in 1522. He actually had a relationship with Anne's sister, Mary Boleyn, in the interim years before he turned his attentions towards her. But we know for certain by 1526 that Henry VIII was falling head over heels in love for Anne Boleyn.
She was not prepared to throw herself away as a mistress to the king. And part of the reason for this may well be that she has seen firsthand what happens to the king's cast-off mistresses, because her sister Mary Boleyn had been the king's most recent mistress. She was the king's lover for several years, may or may not have borne him children, and when the relationship ends and Henry tires of her, he simply discarded her. Mary Boleyn got very, very little from her relationship to Henry VIII.
My mistress and friend, I and my heart put ourselves in your hands, begging you to have them suitors for your good favor, and that your affection for them should not grow less through absence. As I cannot be with you in person, I am sending you the nearest possible thing to that, namely, my picture set in a bracelet, with the whole device which you already know, wishing myself in their place when it shall please you. This by the hand of your loyal servant and friend, Henry R.
Henry VIII bombarded Anne with a number of love letters. Unfortunately, none of Anne's replies survive, so we can only read from Henry's letters what those replies may have been, or certainly what Henry interpreted them to have been. We know that Anne, at times, doesn't reply to Henry's letters, and he writes afterwards to admonish her for not replying. And if I'm honest, these are the works of a lovesick schoolboy. He talks about his enduring love for her. He sends her the dead bodies of deer that he has hunted for her in the hope that when she eats the flesh, she will be reminded of him.
I would you were in my arms or I in yours, for I think it long since I kissed you.
Anne Boleyn had always looked for a good marriage, because marriage is a way towards social status for women. There is no doubt that Henry adored Anne. He loved her deeply. In his letters, he talks about being struck by the dart of love.
She really rebuffed Henry's advances until she got to the point where Henry offered her a legitimate path, a hand in marriage, and a crown.
God's wounds, how am I, a king anointed, to be denied my heart's desire by earthly bonds and barren union? Hath not our holy Pope the power to dissolve what heaven itself did not bless? For Catherine, though faithful, brings forth no son to fortify England's throne. Yet Anne, whose beauty and wit ignite my soul, stirs in me visions of heirs strong and true.
The only real way that Henry was going to be able to marry Anne was if the Pope would annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. And Anne and Henry knew that the best mechanism for achieving that end would be through the king's minister, Thomas Wolsey.
Unto my trusted Cardinal Wolsey, I do bestow this charge, to go before Rome and seek the Holy Father's favour in this most grave matter. Let him press upon his holiness the plight of England and the need for annulment, that I may wed Anne and secure the realm's future. By his cunning and God's grace may our cause find favour.
Henry wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon on the basis that she had been his brother's wife. So they're related to within the first degree of affinity. They are, as far as the church is concerned, brother and sister. And his argument is that you cannot dispense such a marriage. And such a marriage cannot be permitted. It is against church law.
'Tis a weight upon my soul that I have lived all these years in union with mine own brother's wife. Can it be that our barrenness is heaven's judgment upon this sin?
What is quite ironic is that when he first sends to the Pope to request his annulment, his messenger also has a second request for a dispensation to allow him to marry a woman within the first degree of affinity to him. And this is because his sexual relationship with Mary Boleyn has created the same relationship between him and Anne that exists between him and Catherine of Aragon. So it's an ironic point, but I think it also demonstrates very, very clearly that his reasons for annulling the marriage to Catherine were not sincere, and that actually he wanted rid of her because he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. While the Pope is in the Emperor's power, he will never grant the annulment of the Emperor's aunt's marriage. The English try, and Cardinal Wolsey tries, but he's in an impossible situation. He can never do it. He will never be able to annul this marriage. The Pope even lets it be known that if Henry drops the suit, he will allow Princess Mary to marry Henry's illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy. This is how keen the Pope is to appease the King of England, but he cannot give him what he wants.
Wolsey ultimately fails to secure an annulment for Henry from his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, and this leads to his dramatic fall.
Wolsey, who swore Rome's blessing upon my cause, now returns empty-handed. By his own failure, he stands a traitor to both crown and country, and for such betrayal, there can be no pardon. I call upon Thomas Cromwell to take where Wolsey failed, swift, loyal, and sharp. He will see my will done and secure England's future.
Henry knows that the Pope is not going to grant his annulment to his first queen, Catherine of Aragon.
There is no solution other than breaking away from the Pope. Because if the Pope will not grant the annulment, then perhaps the Church needs to move from the Pope.
And therefore he is greatly influenced by these new thinkers, including Anne Boleyn, and taking the unprecedented step to break with the Church of Rome and to install himself as king, as the head of his new church.
As soon as Thomas Cranmer is confirmed as Archbishop of Canterbury, he disavows his oath of allegiance to the Pope and declares the English Church separate from Rome, with the king as its supreme head. And this is the moment that the English Church goes its own way.
In order to do this, Henry actually elevates himself beyond kingship and proclaims that he is an emperor of his own empire. This is really the beginnings of the British Empire. This is where it all begins.
After 7 long years of courting, at last His Majesty is freed from the burdens that held us apart. With quiet ceremony, we did wed on the 25th day of January, in the year of our Lord 1533. Having but 2 months prior sought the blessing of King Francis of France. We are now bound as one, our fates forever entwined.
This day, I crown mine chosen queen, Anne, with the ancient St. Edward's crown, a mark reserved but for monarchs alone. Let all who behold her see England's future, sovereign and resolute. This crown is no mere symbol, it declareth her right as queen, as the woman destined to bear sons who shall uphold our realm. By God's will and mine own command, she standeth crowned in strength and purpose, a new dawning for England.
Now that Henry and Anne were married, Henry intended to present Anne to his country as his legitimate second queen, so he affords her an almost more lavish coronation than his own, and it is thought that Henry was actually crowning the child in Anne's belly at the time.
In this coronation, I do not only crown mine love and lawful wife, but crown also the hope she beareth within her. For Anne is with child, 6 months grown. As St. Edward's sacred crown resteth upon her brow, I seal not merely her place as queen, but the promise of England's continuance, a son, God willing, to secure our line.
God hath blessed me with a daughter, fair Elizabeth. Though they murmured, hoping for a son, I see not shame, but triumph in her bright eyes. She is small yet fierce, with a spirit that I do reckon shall shake kingdoms. Let them scoff, for they know not the power that a woman may wield. I shall teach her this well. In her I see mine own strength, and methinks she shall be the greatest jewel England e'er knew.
Henry had moved heaven and earth to marry Anne Boleyn, and the price for crowning her was the delivery of the much longed for male heir that Henry so desired. But the child that Anne had in 1533 wasn't a son.
Elizabeth's birth was disappointing. I mean, he really did want to have a son, but he knew that both he and Anne were young enough to have more children, and Anne does quickly become pregnant again the following year.
Alas, this Christmastide hath brought me naught but sorrow. I had held such hope within me, yet the babe I carried is lost, taken ere it could breathe the air of this world. My heart is heavy, for this was to be our son, the prince that might have silenced mine enemies and secured mine place. How swiftly joy is turned to dust. They whisper now of curses and God's displeasure. Yet I know not why he would punish me so.
After 2 years of tension and trouble, with mine Queen Anne once more heavy with child, I spend my days in sport and jousting, eager and full of pride as I await the birth of my son. Every night, I do humbly pray that Almighty God may deliver unto us a healthy boy.
Henry VIII loved jousting, and it is an incredibly dangerous sport. Once in his youth, actually, he came close to being killed when he forgot to put the visor down on his helmet, and his friend, the Duke of Suffolk, didn't notice and jousted at him, and actually the lance splintered, and he was very lucky to survive.
In 1536, Henry suffered a disastrous accident whilst jousting. Some reports state that he was unconscious, whilst others just mention the fact that he was severely injured.
He fell badly and his horse landed on top of him.
This really changed Henry's lifestyle. It, in many ways, emasculated him.
One account suggests that he was unconscious for several hours. And there are also suggestions that perhaps there is some sort of brain damage.
I think this is a turning point in Henry's life, and not for the better.
Mine heart yet trembles at the memory of that fateful day. Word came swift and harsh. The king struck down in his joust, thought dead upon the field.
Anne Boleyn would blame her final miscarriage on the news of the king's accident. And it really hammered home to the king and to his court. He still did not have a legitimate male heir.
Now am I at odds with mine Queen Anne, for after the grievous loss of our son, our hope lies barren. The weight of sorrow hath turned to sharp words, and cold silences betwixt us. and my heart, restless and unsatisfied, doth seek solace elsewhere. In Jane Seymour's gentle presence, I find a sweetness and quietude that Anne hath forsaken.
Henry told Anne that he could see that he would have no more boys by her, which was particularly ominous. Henry, by this stage, was involved with Anne's lady-in-waiting, Jane Seymour, who had herself declared that she would not become the king's mistress. He seems to have promised to marry Jane before Anne's downfall. Certainly they discussed marriage.
And I think this is the beginning of the end of Anne's life.
Mine own marriage grows troubled, the king's favour ever more uncertain, his gaze wandering as oft as his mind. Yet, as my heart suffers unrest, so too does England, torn as Cromwell's hand moves swift against the monasteries. I see fields laid waste, holy relics seized, good folk cast adrift, and it pains me. I did not fight for this. I never wished to see God's houses pillaged, nor the faithful driven low. Henry and Cromwell know not the harm they wreak upon this realm, yet I dare not speak against them, lest my own fate be sealed.
Henry VIII now realised that he could profit from those exorbitantly wealthy institutions. So we begin to see a real shift in the landscape of the country. Firstly, the smaller monasteries are dismantled and all of the wealth is funneled back to the crown and really into the coffers of the nobility. Now, this caused great disturbance throughout the country. We have to remember that most of the country is still traditionally Catholic. They rely upon the monasteries not only for education but also for shelter. They really act as almost the safety net of the country. This causes enormous tension throughout the country. There are increased rioting and also rebellions, and this leads to enormous bloodshed and tension throughout the country. Whilst Henry and Cromwell were intent on plundering the spoils from the monasteries and funneling the funds into their coffers, Anne had other ideas. She believed that the wealth from the monasteries should be distributed, much as the monasteries had done, to the common people by way of establishing educational facilities for the masses. The masses had relied upon the monasteries for education. So this set Cromwell and Anne against each other, and Anne actually threatened Cromwell at this point with his head. Cromwell retreated from court, and upon hearing that the king wanted out of the marriage, he returned and fired directly at Anne's head.
A shadow falls upon me, and I feel it well. Cromwell's schemes twist in the dark, and Henry's favour grows colder by the day. Whispers reach mine ears, and I cannot shake the fear that they plot to rid themselves of me. Once I held the king's heart. Now it seems but a memory.
I remind you, madam, that I am king, and therefore you will honour and obey.
I pray that God shall keep me safe from those that now do circle me like wolves.
The end for Anne came very quickly. On the 30th of April 1536, Mark Smeaton, who was a young musician in her household, was invited to dine with Thomas Cromwell. And this was a really flattering invitation for Smeaton. When he arrived, he was immediately arrested and interrogated, possibly under torture. And by the next day, he had confessed to adultery with Anne. Anne almost certainly knew nothing of this. She attended the May Day jousts at Greenwich with Henry VIII, and she would have been alarmed when Henry suddenly got to his feet and stalked away, having received a message. She would never see him again.
Very dramatically, on the 2nd of May 1536, Anne is arrested at the Palace of Greenwich and is taken to the Tower of London. She has no idea why she has been arrested, but two people do: her husband, Henry VIII, and his minister, Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell is almost certainly the architect of Anne's downfall, but Henry is the commissioner. He is the power behind this dreadful move.
These days, I find mine mind troubled, weighed down by the counsel of Cromwell, who revealeth grievous accusations against my queen, treason, adultery, even incest. To uphold the honor of mine crown, I have commanded her to the Tower, where she shall await judgment. It pains me, yet such betrayal I cannot abide.
Anne is accused of adultery with no less than 5 men at Henry's court. And indeed, one of those men is her brother George, so the charge of incest is added to the increasingly growing list of charges. She is also accused of imagining the king's death, the penalty for which is treason.
I stand accused, yet I know not the truth of these grievous charges laid against me. Treason, adultery, aye, even incest, crimes I would ne'er commit. Mine mind doth reel within these prison walls, for I see neither cause nor justice in this. How swiftly they do twist their words to paint me false.
He knew that Anne wasn't protected like Catherine was by a foreign power, and therefore she was much more easily dispatched than Catherine.
I do plead with God and with mine sovereign Lord to spare mine life, that I may yet live to raise our daughter in peace. But alas, mine hopes do feel but small and faint.
Anne's downfall happens very, very quickly, and certainly Thomas Cromwell is deeply involved. He allied himself with Eustace Chapuis, the imperial ambassador, who very much spoke for Princess Mary, who agreed that she would accept a new marriage, even if it meant that she was displaced by a half-brother, because she wanted rid of Anne Boleyn. Chapuis and Cromwell were also in contact with the Seymours, particularly Edward Seymour, Jane Seymour's brother, who was very much coaching her on how to act around the king. So there's a very powerful party against Anne. However, the fall cannot have happened without Henry. He was the one who could decide whether or not to take steps against Anne. Certainly, he does not seem to have believed her guilty of adultery and incest, and the charges really don't add up. He was referred to as the happiest cuckold that people had ever seen, which again suggests that he wasn't devastated by this terrible news about his wife. Henry is clearly the driving force behind the decision to rid himself of Anne and take a new wife.
I have no choice but to end her life, for Anne hath brought upon me naught but betrayal and turmoil. Once she was my heart's desire, yet now I see only the discord she hath sown within my reign. Her execution shall sever this bond, and free me from a union fraught with disappointment, clearing the way for a new marriage, one that, God willing, will grant me a son and restore peace to my soul.
Your Grace's displeasure and my imprisonment are things so strange to me, that what to write or what to excuse, I am altogether ignorant. Try me, good king, but let me have a lawful trial, and let not my sworn enemies sit as my accusers and as my judges. Yea, Let me receive an open trial, for my truth shall fear no open shame. My last and only request shall be, that myself only bear the burden of your grace's displeasure, and that it may not touch the innocent souls of those poor gentlemen, whom, as I understand, are likewise in strait imprisonment for my sake. If ever I have found favour in your sight, if ever the name of Anne Boleyn have been pleasing in your ears, then let me obtain this request. And so I will leave to trouble your grace any further, with mine earnest prayer to the Trinity to have your grace in his good keeping, and to direct you in all your actions. From my doleful prison in the Tower,
On the 19th of May, Anne was led from her apartments at the Tower of London at 8 a.m. to a scaffold that had been erected on Tower Green. Everything that was to happen to Anne on that day had been carefully planned by her husband, Henry. She was led through a crowd of perhaps 2,000 people to the scaffold, which was draped in black. And as she mounted the scaffold steps, it was noted by observers that she looked calm, and some even said that she had never looked so beautiful. She then turned and addressed the crowd and gave what was really an archetypal scaffold speech. There were set elements to such speeches, such as praising the king and also asking the crowd to pray for her. But what Anne doesn't do in this moment is admit her guilt. This was expected of someone at the point of death, but Anne defiantly stated that while she recognised that she had been found guilty according to the law, she would speak nothing against it.
I have commanded that the finest swordsman from France be brought forth, that Anne may meet her end swiftly and with due mercy. Let a cannon be fired once the deed is done, so all shall know the matter is finished, and my throne stands cleansed of her treachery.
She paid the executioner the sum of £23, 6 shillings and 8 pence, which was roughly 2 years' wages for a skilled labourer. Anne then knelt into the straw, and one of her ladies blindfolded her, and she prayed, "To God I commend my soul, Lord Jesus, commend my soul." The executioner then grasped the sword from beneath the straw, but called to his assistant for his sword, and then looked blindly to the moving assistant as the executioner swung the sword and severed her head from her body.
At last, the news is brought to me. Anne is dead. The cannon hath sounded, and with it, the end of her troubled presence in my life. I feel the weight lift, as if a storm hath passed, leaving calm in its wake. What is done is done. Now I may look forward, unbound and free to shape my realm anew.
Compared to Henry's first 2 queens, Jane Seymour was rather less complicated. She was rather meek and slightly milder than Catherine and Anne, and was certainly happy to be more pliant to Henry's will.
Barely a fortnight hath passed since Anne's end, and now I take Jane Seymour as my new queen. In her quiet grace, I find a balm to my spirit. Jane bringeth with her a grace and modesty that replaceth the lavishness of Anne's household. Gone are the excesses and indulgences. In their place, Jane brings formality and quiet dignity. She is the very image of a queen in virtue and composure, a fitting companion to uphold the honor of the crown.
It is a marriage that he hopes will bear sons. Jane comes from a very fertile family. She has many brothers, and he's hopeful that Jane will prove a very different wife to Anne Boleyn. It actually takes Jane a really long time to fall pregnant, and there are signs that not all is right in the marriage. In the autumn of 1536, for example, Henry very publicly reminds Jane Seymour of Anne Boleyn's fate and tells her not to meddle in politics. Her coronation keeps being postponed, which must have caused anxiety for the new queen, because of course she knows what has happened to Anne Boleyn. She knows her predecessor has been beheaded. Finally, at the start of 1537, Jane realises she's pregnant, and when she feels the baby quicken, so she feels the baby move, the whole country erupts into celebration. Henry is incredibly solicitous throughout her pregnancy. He vows to remain close to her so she's not frightened by any rumours. This is probably a reference to Anne Boleyn's final miscarriage and the fact that she blamed it from Henry's fall from a horse.
After many years of heartache, Jane Seymour finally gave Henry the son and heir that he so desperately craved.
When Jane goes into labour in October 1537, the whole country hold their breath, and it's a very long, very arduous labour. Finally, after 2 days, Jane gives birth, and it is a healthy prince, and everybody celebrates.
Henry was elated. There was much celebration throughout the kingdom, and lavish feasts and jousts were prepared.
This is the moment that Henry has been waiting for nearly 30 years.
At long last, my prayers have been answered. A son is born. Young Edward, my heir, my legacy. My heart is elated beyond measure, for now England's future is secure, and my line shall endure. God hath granted me the greatest gift of all.
And everything seems all right with Jane. She seems to be recovering well. She's able to send out the official birth announcement shortly after the birth. However, the day after the christening, it's realised that she has a fever and she is suffering from childbed fever. Childbirth is a very, very common form of death for women in the period. And Jane holds on until the 24th of October, 12 days after the birth of her son, before sadly dying in the night.
Henry VIII was absolutely crestfallen at the death of Jane Seymour. He really appears to have entered into a prolonged period of mourning and depression. Henry at this point had gone through a huge amount of heartache. He had gone to extraordinary lengths to secure this son and heir, and then tragically his wife had been snatched away from him. He really must have felt that everything was stacked against him at this point.
My joy hath turned to ashes. Jane, my beloved, is gone. She gave me a son, an heir, yet I am left broken and bereft. The light she brought to my life is now but a shadow, and in my heart there is only sorrow. England may rejoice in Edward, but I am lost without her.
Henry was devastated by Jane's death. Usually when his wife died, often because he caused the death himself, he had another candidate lined up for wife. But with Jane, it came as a complete shock. It came at the moment that he was happiest. She had given him a son. From the moment of her death, she undoubtedly became his most beloved wife. She is the wife that he chose to be buried with. She is the wife who people prayed for her soul at court and in churches. He insisted that she was memorialised. She appears in paintings of the Tudor dynasty commissioned after her death. She was always his favourite wife, and it's really because she gave him his son, even at the cost of her own life. He secluded himself away at Esher Palace for a time and does seem to have sincerely mourned her. However, Of course, he only had one son, and he knows from experience, he knows from his own brother Arthur, that one son is not enough for a king. And so almost immediately, measures are put in place to try and find the king a new bride.
Ten long years have passed since Jane was taken from me. I feel the weight of time press harder upon my weary bones. Now, as I lie upon this bed, frail and fading, I find my mind drawn to her memory, to the days when hope and joy filled my heart. My strength wanes, and though I have ruled with might, even kings cannot escape the quiet approach of death. Soon, I shall be but a memory, and may God grant me peace, as he granted me my Jane.
Henry VIII had been ill on and off for the latter part of 1546. And just before Christmas, he leaves the Queen and his daughter Mary and goes to Westminster. And it's clear very quickly that he's dying. He spends his last few weeks cloistered away with his council, and particularly his secretary, William Paget, who is very close to Edward Seymour, Henry's brother-in-law, the brother of Queen Jane, and the uncle of the heir to the throne. During this period, Henry asks that a new will is drawn up. He'd previously made a will in the early days of his marriage to Catherine Parr, and he seems to have named her as regent in the event of his death. But this new will completely overturned that. Instead of naming anyone as regent, Henry in fact established a council of equal ranking executors. So all of these men have an equal role to play. And it was hoped that they would guide Edward through his minority and into his adult reign.
Henry was acutely aware of the difficulties of child rulers. Henry appointed a regency council for his son, and Edward then appointed a Lord Protector, his uncle Edward Seymour.
Since Jane's passing, 3 more wives have come and gone, yet none have filled the void she left. Now by my side remains Catherine Parr, steadfast and true, as my final days draw near. My children, Mary, Elizabeth, and young Edward, shall carry forth my blood and name beyond my earthly reign. In them my legacy shall endure, though I will soon be naught but history.
In his final days, really only William Paget and Edward Seymour have access to the king. When he dies, they keep the death secret to the extent that food is still brought to his chamber. And this is to give Edward Seymour time to ride to Hertford to go and acquire his nephew, the new king, and he brings him to London.
After years of ill health, Henry VIII finally dies in 1547, leaving the throne to his son, Edward, who was only 9 years old. Henry VIII was buried at Windsor, and he chose to be buried with his third queen, Jane Seymour. Much is made of this choice in burial. We know that Henry was very fond of Jane, that he loved her, and that he liked to insert her into posthumous portraits of his family. However, Henry had no other choice but to be buried with Jane. He had annulled his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, he had beheaded Anne Boleyn, Anne of Cleves was still alive, he had beheaded Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr was also still alive, so he had no choice but to be buried with Jane. It's very difficult to state whether Henry VIII truly loved any of his wives. I think he respected many of them. I think he was besotted with most of them, and he was obsessed, certainly, by Anne Boleyn. But ultimately, I think Henry only had room to love one person, and that was himself.